Philosophies on Self-Discipline. Lessons from history's greatest thinkers on how to start, endure, finish, and achieve. Written by Peter Hollins, narrated by Russell Newton. Aristotle believed that temptations and distractions will always exist, but we need to be prepared to resist them with good habits. We can find improvement in every situation by seeking the golden mean, perfect moderation. We've looked at two important factors of human motivation in the previous chapters, namely, A, our innate and malleable drive that Nietzsche called the will to power, and B, that pesky phenomenon called akrasia that threatens to derail our will to power and take us off the path that leads to our goals. It's a fundamental truth that any deliberate transformation requires energy and effort. If we wish to change and develop as people, we need to move from where we are to where we want to be, and that means we have to push against the momentum that keeps us as we are and pull toward what we want but doesn't exist yet. Improvement is seldom easy. When you're learning something new, working hard toward a goal, or trying to gain mastery over something, you need self-control to consistently steer you in the right direction. Like a sailboat on the ocean, every gust of wind and wave threatens to push it off course, but it's up to your self-discipline and control to steer it where you want it to go. We already briefly discussed Aristotle's view on self-discipline in a previous chapter. For him, as it was for many of his contemporaries, rationality and willpower could be undermined by laziness, uncontrolled emotions, and poor judgment. In the same way as a heavy object can be moved if one has strengthened their muscles adequately enough to lift it, Aristotle fundamentally believed that a sufficiently strong will could achieve other more abstract goals. Self-control, as Aristotle defined it, is not very different from what we mean by self-discipline: the ability to direct your actions toward your own ends and your own chosen course of action. Now, it's easy to stay on the right path when everything is going smoothly, but the real test of self-discipline is how it operates when temptations and distractions arise. If you never have any temptations, there's no need for self-control. Likewise, if you haven't bothered to set up any goals, you can't really tell when you're being tempted away from them. No, self-control is necessary and inescapable for anyone who wants to be better than they currently are. It's not very different from the control we exhibit over the muscles of our body. If we want to learn to dance, sing, manipulate delicate machinery, or play an instrument, we must master control over all the relevant bodily muscles and tendons until they behave according to our will. In precisely the same way, our will itself is like a muscle that can grow either stronger or weaker according to the degree it is exercised. Aristotle focused on different aspects of self-control. For example, the role of endurance, stubbornness, temperance, and virtuousness. But whatever terms and concepts we use, there is an underlying concept of purposeful control of the self and the will to achieve one's chosen ends, despite temptation and distraction. Aristotle was concerned with practical wisdom and all the things necessary to live a life that was virtuous and ethical. Aristotle believed that philosophy was about determining man's true purpose and set about outlining ways that people could use reason and rationality to live good lives. He took pains to divide lack of self-control into different types. For example, some temptations are actually necessary to life in moderate amounts, but could be overindulged in, such as food, money, or sex. Failure to partake in these things modestly was a sign that someone placed too much importance in fleeting pleasure and had an excess of things that were not bad in themselves, but could become problematic if taken to extremes. The solution here would be to find a more appropriate way to enjoy these things without going too far. On the other hand, certain distractions and pleasures are not necessary for life and can actually harm it. These are the things we typically form unhealthy addictions to, like smoking or alcohol. Some passions are paradoxically not all that pleasurable and are bad for us on top of it. For example, strange and bizarre obsessions or mental disorders that cause behavior that isn't necessarily enjoyed but can't be resisted. Aristotle also noted the special case of temptations driven by anger and rage rather than pleasure, although he seemed to think that this was less egregious than acting purely for pleasure's sake. Ultimately, however, Aristotle hails from a very particular culture and historical context, and presents a view of human nature that, in many ways, is not applicable to our own modern personal development agenda. While Aristotle tried to tease apart human motivations in what can be understood as a primitive psychology, you needn't spend too long unraveling whether your distractions are due to vice, impetuosity, weakness of will, and so on. Rather, there are, at most, two main ways that self-control can be lacking. 1. You never make a goal in the first place, and allow irrational parts of yourself to dominate your reason and will, or 2. You make a goal, but fail to stick to it, because irrational parts of yourself have carried you away from the path you need to be on. Either problem may be fixable to a greater or lesser degree, depending on the goals in question and your own innate ability to summon your will with conviction. You could spend a lot of time deliberating over how serious any one distraction is, how culpable you are for being steered off course, and who's really to blame for you not having better self-control. But none of this will significantly bring you any closer to where you want to be. What is most important is understanding that to achieve anything of value, you need to clarify your goals, strengthen your will so it focuses on the actions needed to achieve that goal, and persist with it, no matter what. Aristotle's vision of human nature is somewhat old-fashioned, but in many ways his attitude is a perfect antidote for some of our modern passivity, laziness, and avoidance. How many of us use weak psychological excuses to justify bad behavior? Oh, I just have commitment issues. Or blame anyone but ourselves for our inaction. Aristotle had a surprisingly practical and no-nonsense view. If we want a good life, we have to work for it, and this takes practice, just like any other thing worth doing. What Aristotle called virtue and morality and ethics, we may call by different names today, but the underlying principles are not so different. Aristotle recognized hundreds of years ago that self-discipline and control were unavoidable if we wanted to achieve mastery over ourselves and reach the goals we desired. Let's try to condense down some of Aristotle's considerable writings and distill their essence so we can apply those principles to our modern lives. Make self-control a habit, but expect it to be hard. In many ways, Aristotle felt that a man's character was very much determined by his actions. His inner wishes and dreams, his intentions, his values, all of these were unreal until they were brought to life by action. A goal is just a thought until you concretely do something about it. Many of us have lofty goals for ourselves and a rich inner vision of who we are. We like to believe we're brave or creative or kind or fair, but what does our actual life look like? What are the actions we take every day routinely? Aristotle thought that it was only acting brave that made you brave, only being creative that made you creative, only behaving kindly that made you kind. After all, if you wanted to be a pianist, you'd have to play the piano. If you wanted to call yourself an engineer, you'd need to engineer. Similarly, if your goal is to be an intelligent, creative, successful, well-adjusted person, you need to practice doing all the things associated with that goal. In a world where people are familiar with most psychological concepts and are happy to think of their identities in these terms, Aristotle gives a sobering reminder. None of that really counts. Only what you do counts. If you make a plan but don't follow through, the plan means nothing. If you believe yourself to be a hardworking person but shirk your duties when it matters, your belief is an illusion. If you wish and hope and pray you'll be wealthy one day, but never do a thing to make it happen, your wishes and hopes and prayers are even less substantial than the wind. Who we are is, in many ways, a culmination of what we do and have done. What's more, it's not just single or occasional actions that make or break us. After all, nobody is entitled to a doctorate degree after reading half a book one afternoon, but what we do consistently over time. If you could look at your whole life and average out every action you ever took, what would that average action look like? In fact, you already have your answer. You are the average of all your actions thus far. Is your average action a healthy one that benefits you and drives you ever closer to your goals? Or is it one of apathy and self-destruction? Self-control is less a fixed disposition or character that you either have or don't have, and more an ability that you strengthen and tone, like a muscle. It's something that you refresh and recommit to every day, in every action and every word. Let's look at the facts. If you want to improve or gain mastery or reach your goals, effort is required, non-negotiable. Temptations and distractions are a part of life and will occur, also non-negotiable. What we practice, we become better at. Taken all together, these facts mean one thing, that if we wish to reach our goals, we need to expect challenges and hurdles and be prepared to resist them and carry on with our efforts anyway. There will always be temptations, so it's no use behaving as though they don't exist, then being surprised when they pop up. Rather, we can take control and actively practice resisting them until it becomes a habit. Successful people don't just dwell on what they want to achieve. They also have a stone-cold, pragmatic appreciation for everything that can and will stand in their way, and a plan to combat it. There's no use feeling discouraged when setbacks occur. There's no reason to expect that you are entitled to an easy and trouble-free life. Make self-control a habit and expect that it won't be easy. If you know that you'll have to work hard, you're never caught off guard when you are occasionally tired, when you misstep, receive criticism, or encounter something painful or difficult. You simply recognize it for what it is, the price of learning and gaining mastery. Frame your activities not as grand goals and glorious finish lines, but as humble daily habits that you can chip away at day in and day out. These daily habits are where the magic happens, bit by bit. You pushed through and did your practice that cold, rainy Tuesday when all you wanted to do was laze in front of the TV? Congratulations. You've taken one more step towards self-control and discipline, and one step away from laziness and apathy. As an exercise, try writing down your life goals and see how they can be reframed as concrete daily habits. For example, you could write, I want to master this challenging new metalworking technique, and reword it as, I will dedicate a half hour every day to metalworking, rain or shine, no matter what. As you read through your goals, understand that you're really learning two things at once: how to achieve your particular stated goal and how to have a stronger will. In a way, the stronger will is the greater accomplishment because it can be transferred to any and all future goals. Seek the golden mean. Aristotle returned to a few key ideas all throughout his career, and one of the most common was the idea of moderation. In his view, the best way to act in any given moment was, more often than not, a perfect balance between two extreme options. While it was foolish to succumb to one extreme, it was also foolish to overcorrect and do too much of a good thing. Wisdom and virtue were to be found, according to Aristotle, in that magical place in the middle. We are all born with certain tendencies and predispositions, a particular history in a particular context and culture, a unique upbringing, a set of inbuilt characteristics and qualities. But, importantly, we're also born with a free will and the ability to use reason to change who we are, to improve, and to learn. You could be born with a particular weakness for a particular temptation, but with consistent reason and effort, you deliberately seek out the opposite and pull yourself closer to the middle point. For example, you may have a tendency to overeat and come from a family of overeaters, living in a country with a high obesity rate and plentiful access to fattening foods. Knowing this, you consistently strive to pull away from that lifestyle and instead seek out healthier foods and eating in moderation. You could also forego your own reason and will, however, and be carried away with your passions. In this case, everything else that is encouraging you to overeat. Or you could be tempted to strive toward the other extreme end of the spectrum. That is, constantly undernourishing or even starving yourself out of intense fear of becoming an overeater yourself. This is unhealthy too. The best way is thus striving toward the middle point, the point of neither excess nor lack, the golden mean. It may seem simple on the surface, but moderation and seeking the balanced median is a profoundly effective way to think about moderating your own will against life's many distractions and enticements. It's not a black or white thing either. Some days, we're able to successfully work the trade-off between our strength of will and the things that threaten our self-discipline, and some days we aren't. But remember, it's all about average actions. Picture life as a pendulum, with you swinging between two extremes, both of them bringing their own problems. What you want is to find the still, calm place in the middle, where you move only a little from side to side, if at all. In the beginning, you may swing wildly, particularly if some of your vices and passions are great. But as you master self-control, you're better able to self-regulate and keep yourself in that rational, composed middle state. A great practical exercise to practice this principle is to get in the habit of checking in with yourself regularly and seeing exactly what's needed in any one moment. For example, you may wake up in the morning and do a brief body scan where you check in with yourself and how you feel, as well as take a quiet moment where you examine your emotional state, your thoughts, and so on. After you've run this mini diagnostic, you can ask yourself, what's needed today? See what there is too much of and too little of, and commit to taking action to correcting any perceived imbalances. You might notice that you're feeling a little sore from yesterday's workout and decide to take it a little easier today and stretch more. You also notice some nagging guilt about the work you left unfinished yesterday. You commit to pushing harder today, knowing that you'll only feel bad about yourself if you don't follow through with your commitments. You could also try this practice all throughout the day. Simply bring awareness to your current state and make conscious efforts to bring yourself to the golden median. Notice yourself speaking unkindly to a loved one and commit there and then to softening your tone. Notice that you've had 3 glasses of wine and feel a bit nauseated, and turn down the next one, while making a promise to yourself to never drink more than 2 glasses in the future. If this seems like too small an activity to make any real difference, well, its smallness is its virtue. The thing is, if you can master self-regulation and minor course corrections on this scale, you give yourself all the more chance of resisting bigger temptations when they arise, or nipping them in the bud before they become big and overwhelming passions. This is like doing many small repetitions of lifting a weight to build strength in a muscle. By regularly flexing our willpower muscle, even if only in small ways, we're still strengthening it, still practicing the art of saying no to anything that takes us off course. Importantly, you don't have to actually achieve the golden mean perfectly all the time. It's highly unlikely you can. Rather, it's in the act of attempting to find that balance that shows us what the best action is. The takeaway? Self-control, or self-discipline, is the inner force that allows us to consistently work toward our goals in the face of temptations and distractions. Self-control is the ability to direct your actions toward your own chosen ends, despite experiencing interference from both outside and within you. To Aristotle, self-control involves such aspects as endurance, stubbornness, temperance, and virtuousness. Developing self-control is akin to building up muscle strength. Both can become either weaker or stronger, depending on the extent to which you exercise them. When you consistently challenge yourself to resist temptations and rise up against distractions in order to persevere toward your goals, you build stronger self-control and find it easier to call on such resources again as necessary. Lack of self-control manifests in 2 main ways. 1, you fail to make a goal such that irrational parts of you dominate your will instead. And 2, you make a goal but fail to stick to it as irrational parts of you have derailed you from following through. We are our habits. Turn goals into concrete actions and commit to them every day. Self-discipline remains an empty word unless you practice it in your daily life. You do not become a self-disciplined person just by calling yourself self-disciplined. You need to personify it through your attitudes and actions in order to become it. Passions will always exist. It's up to us to expect them and be prepared to work hard against them. The true test of self-control, after all, is persistence in effort amidst temptations and distractions to fulfill a chosen goal. Aristotle advocated the value of moderation. He believed that the best course of action is more often than not found somewhere in the middle of two extreme options. If you're unsure what the best action is, act in a way that pushes you closer to the golden mean. Find that calm, controlled state of balance in the middle. This has been Philosophies on Self-Discipline, lessons from history's greatest thinkers on how to start, endure, finish, and achieve. Written by Peter Hollins, narrated by Russell Newton. Copyright 2020 by Peter Hollins. Production copyright by Peter Hollins.